December 1962. Snow fell and didn't stop for 72 days. Britain's lorries froze on the roads. Drivers couldn't move them. Diesel turned to ice. For a moment, nobody panicked. They thought it would pass, but it didn't. Days turned into weeks. The lorries stayed frozen. Then reality hit. Coal didn't reach homes. Milk vanished. Food ran out. Villages were cut off. People starved. Britain discovered a terrifying truth. Without lorries, the nation was defenceless. This is the story of how winter nearly broke the country that built the modern world. It started like any other winter. October and November 1962 were mild. People prepared for Christmas. Shops stocked shelves. Families planned dinners. Lorries rolled across British roads carrying goods from factories to towns. Milk bottles arrived on doorsteps each morning. Coal merchants filled yards with fuel. The transport system worked perfectly. Britain's roads carried the country on their backs. Nobody suspected what was coming. Then the weather changed on December 22nd. High pressure moved northeast. Bitterly cold winds arrived from the Atlantic. On December 24th, a weather front pushed south and turned to snow. Boxing Day brought the first blizzard. Snow fell and fell. By December 29th, a 36-hour blizzard swept across southern England and Wales. Gale force winds reached 81 miles per hour. Snowdrifts piled to 15 and 20 feet high. Villages disappeared under white walls of snow. Roads simply ceased to exist. By January 1st, 1963, Britain was gripped by something nobody expected. The temperature stayed below freezing for weeks. The snow never melted. Instead, it spread. More snow fell in January. More came in February. By early March, the country had endured nearly 3 months of continuous winter. This was the Big Freeze. This was the coldest winter since 1740. Britain had not experienced anything like this in over 200 years. For lorry drivers, the cold created a new enemy. Diesel fuel contains paraffin wax. In extreme cold, this wax crystallizes and clogs fuel filters. Below -7 to -9 degrees Celsius, diesel gels. The fuel thickens into sludge that won't flow through lines. Engines won't start. Lorries simply stop. Most 1960s diesel was summer grade. It waxed easily. Below -20 degrees Celsius, it became almost solid. On the A9 in Scotland, drivers heading north discovered this truth too late. Heavy vehicles came to a standstill in massive drifts. Some trucks got stuck at Dalwhinnie. The Bedford TK, the workhorse of British deliveries, became useless. Leyland Octopus Heavies froze. ERF lorries stopped. Drivers tried everything. Some lit fires beneath their fuel tanks to melt the wax. They used paraffin stoves or blow lamps. It was dangerous. A single spark could ignite fuel vapours, but drivers were desperate. Nothing worked consistently. Eventually they gave up. They left their lorries where they stopped and walked through waist-deep snow for help. On the tarnished road between Keith and Elgin, more than 100 vehicles became stranded. Drivers abandoned their trucks. They walked several miles to nearby towns for help. Some hitched rides with tractors that managed to push through. Some walked for miles. One truck carried 9 bulls meant for delivery. The driver hit the drifts at 2 a.m. He waited until daybreak, then waded a mile through snow alone to find help. When rescue came, days later, the animals were still alive, but exhausted. This was the reality of truck transport in the Big Freeze. Coal heated British homes in 1963. Electricity could not meet demand. Coal merchants ran out of stock in January. People desperately needed fuel to survive. Coal lorries were supposed to deliver. They couldn't move. Coal merchants were overwhelmed with orders from terrified customers, but delivery lorries could not navigate the frozen roads. In Wiltshire, families gave up waiting. They took sack trucks and trolleys to coal yards and hauled their own fuel home through the snow. Milk presented another problem. Milk lorries travelled set routes every morning. Millions of bottles arrived on doorsteps. In the Big Freeze, milk lorries couldn't reach collection points. Farms poured milk down drains because transport had stopped. Cities faced shortages. Some families went without. The visible sign of this crisis was shocking. Milk bottles froze solid on doorsteps. The cream inside expanded and froze inches above the bottleneck, creating icy towers on doorsteps. Housewives accused each other of hiding bottles. In reality, the milk was buried in drifts taller than houses. Emergency supply lorries attempted 24-hour operations. They ran day and night trying to reach stranded communities. But the scale of the problem was beyond their capacity. Roads that carried food, fuel, and medicines simply ceased to function. Supply chains broke. For the first time since the Second World War, Britain faced shortages of essential goods because transport had failed completely. In early January, 90,000 miles of highway were impassable. By early February, roads across entire regions were buried under drifts or snowbound. Scotland was completely cut off. Cornwall was unreachable. Entire regions became isolated. Villages that depended on daily deliveries faced crisis. Shopkeepers couldn't restock shelves. Bread vans couldn't arrive. Lorries carrying newspapers couldn't get through. Information stopped flowing. Some villages were completely unreachable for weeks. Snow clearing crews worked around the clock. Wiltshire County Council deployed 700 council roadmen and 200 snow clearing vehicles. They worked day and night. The cost was enormous. Wiltshire alone spent around £50,000 for the clearing operation. This was money the county didn't budget for. Rock salt to melt ice became scarce. Lorries couldn't deliver more salt because roads were blocked. It became circular. The country needed lorries to clear roads so lorries could drive. But lorries couldn't drive until roads were cleared. Roads that existed theoretically were impassable practically. The Bedford TK, the workhorse of British deliveries, became useless in the cold. Leyland Octopus heavies froze. ERF lorries stopped. Modern diesel engines struggled, but something unexpected happened. Vintage steam lorries, left over from earlier decades, were brought out of semi-retirement. Sentinels from the 1920s and 1930s, powered by coal and water, could still move. They generated their own heat. They didn't rely on diesel. While modern progress sat frozen, these old machines worked. They hauled supplies to isolated villages. They delivered coal. They proved that sometimes the old way was more reliable than the new way. But these veterans were few. There weren't enough to solve the crisis. The transport collapse created cascading crises. Food shortages appeared in cities. Coal didn't reach homes. Families without coal froze indoors. Some died trying to stay warm. Gas pipes froze. People couldn't get water. Road tankers delivered water in buckets to those lucky enough to be near routes. Milk deliveries stopped. Bread didn't arrive. Rationing memories from the Second World War returned. People feared food would run out. Farms faced catastrophe. Livestock needed feed. Lorries that should have delivered hay and grain couldn't get through. Farmers watched their animals starve. By the time the freeze ended, estimates suggested millions of sheep died across the country. Crops froze in fields. Potatoes and carrots froze solid in the ground. Farmers needed pneumatic drills and hammers to extract them. Tractors got stuck. Farm vehicles broke down. Drivers stranded on roads faced life or death situations. On the Tarnish Road, drivers abandoned expensive lorries worth thousands of pounds. The financial loss was nothing compared to staying in an unheated cab. Some drivers lit fires under their trucks, hoping to warm fuel. They risked explosion. Some poured hot water over engines. Some tried to push vehicles manually. Nothing worked consistently in temperatures below minus 20 degrees Celsius. At Dalwhinnie in the Highlands, petrol pumps were completely engulfed in snow. Lorries needed fuel. They couldn't get it. Rescue operations deployed tractors and bulldozers. Progress was measured in miles per day. Emergency supplies went by sledge and helicopter. In the North York moors near Fylingdales, a truck carrying livestock, including 9 bulls, got so stranded that the RAF had to intervene. RAF Whirlwind helicopters flew the biggest airlift in British aviation history. They rescued thousands of animals trapped across the moors and highlands. The Fylingdales livestock rescue became legendary. It took days to extract all the stranded animals. When they finally reached safety, they were alive but traumatized. Other animals weren't as lucky. Farmers found frozen sheep and cattle in drifts. Rescue crews improvised. They couldn't wait for equipment. The RAC worked 24 hours. Heavy recovery vehicles pushed through snow. Some lorries were dug out by hand. Crews would arrive and find vehicles completely buried. They would excavate them like archaeologists uncovering artifacts. Sometimes they found drivers still inside. Sometimes they found empty cabs. Sometimes they found lorries abandoned so long that snow had drifted back over them. What had been a visible road hazard became an invisible danger. Emergency lorries attempted to maintain basic supply. They ran specialised routes to hospitals and critical facilities. Regular commercial deliveries stopped. The lorry drivers who managed to work faced conditions that would terrify modern drivers. Driving 20 miles might take 12 hours. Visibility was zero. Roads were invisible. Steep hills became death traps. Some drivers stayed put for days, waiting for conditions to improve. Some never arrived. Some crashed in blizzards. The risks were extreme. The rewards were minimal. February brought brief thaws followed by vicious return storms. More snow fell in early February than in January. Drifts grew deeper. The situation actually worsened. Road crews thought they were winning. They weren't. On February 8th, blizzards returned with unprecedented force. The country seemed frozen permanently. Some people believed winter would never end. Children had been home from school for weeks. Businesses had stopped trying to operate. The country was entering a state of shock. Then on March 4th, the forecast changed. Mild southwesterly winds were approaching. Temperatures began to climb. On March 6th, Britain woke to something it hadn't felt in 72 days, a morning without frost. For the first time since December 26th, the ground was not frozen. By March 6th, London's temperature reached 17 degrees Celsius. The contrast was shocking. From freezing to spring-like warmth in hours, the thaw began, but the thaw created new crises. Ground frozen solid for 3 months couldn't absorb melting snow. Rivers burst their banks. Flooding became the next disaster. The Trent flooded at Nottingham. Hundreds of homes went underwater. In Yorkshire, the Wharfe, Derwent, Ayr and Ouse all burst their banks. The town of Selby was almost completely underwater. 70% of all houses were flooded. Snow that had brought one crisis created another. Lorries now needed to navigate flooded roads. Bridges were out. Routes were impassable in new ways. Recovery took weeks. The Big Freeze revealed Britain's fragility. Lorries were the economic backbone. Without them, the country stopped. Food, fuel and supply networks failed. The financial cost was staggering. Wiltshire County Council spent £50,000. Insurance claims exceeded budgets. Today, modern diesel has additives and trucks have heaters. But the lesson endures. Transport systems are only as strong as the worst conditions they face. The winter of 1963 proved that.